Greg, welcome.
Hey, how are you, Tad?
So today's panel is about demystifying oil painting. Before we get into that, do you think you could introduce yourself for the rest of us?
Sure. Are we live now?
We're live.
Cool. Well, everybody, my name's Greg Manchess, and I've been a freelance illustrator for a few decades now. And I started out from square one, not really knowing what I was doing, and just wanting to be an illustrator so bad that I learned after I jumped off the cliff. And I've done any number of kinds of jobs, from book cover work to magazine work to advertising, movie work, a little bit of conceptual work. I'm also an author, and I've written what I call a widescreen novel called Above the Timberline. I wrote that and painted all of it. It's got 124 paintings throughout the novel. So if you're not familiar with that, it's called Above the Timberline. If you are familiar, you'll see some of what I did today for the book. The process is pretty much simply applying the paint. We're going to talk about that as we go. Tad, if you want to watch any questions that come in, let me know that way, because I'll be talking about the demo. How's that?
Great. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and submit them to the Q&A, and we'll do our best to interrupt you when it's appropriate.
Yeah, sure. And I can ask as well. I want everybody to know that there aren't any taboo questions. Don't worry about what you're going to ask me, whether or not I use photography, whether or not I project, whether or not I draw from my head, or whatever, anything about what brushes I use, the paint, the surface. I want to demystify all that. Whatever you want to know just about oil paint, you just ask, and I will answer truthfully about the process of laying down pigment.
Yeah, which oil paint tastes the best?
What oil paint? What?
Tastes
the best. Well, you want to get Old Holland because there's a lot of pigment in there, and you can chew on it, Yeah. Oh my gosh. And the colors are flavored, right? So Lizarin Crimson is raspberry. Ultramarine is blueberry, all that stuff.
Oh, wow. We're already getting some actual real questions rolling in here.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you want me to just go ahead and...
I'll tell you what, why don't I start the first demo? I'm going to do two today. I'll start the first demo and introduce it, and then we can take the question.
Sounds good.
So I'll hit share screen, right?
That should do it.
And I'm going to flip over to another screen where this is set up. You can see that, right?
We can see it.
Oh, one thing I wanted to do, hold on one second, is pull that up. Oh, now everybody's seeing all my files. I'm so sorry about that. Here we go. Let's get this up. And oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, hold on one second. It's right here. There it is. Okay. So what I'm going to do is show you the finished painting here, right next to the time lapse. So you can see where I'm headed. Let's get rid of that. You can see where I'm headed, and we're starting this. This is going to start out at actual speed, but we're going to ramp it up to 2 times and then 5 times speed. So basically, I projected a drawing of Deckard from Blade Runner. I projected the photo, rather. To get my drawing, I just traced off lightly. You can see those lines, just a little bit, as a guide to show me where to go. And then I started applying paint. I start with the darks first and work my way up to the lights. So if you want to shoot me that first question, Tad, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, our first question is just asking, is it possible to fix a mistake in your painting after it's been made?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the most flexible medium is oil paint. What you see is what you get. You put it down, it's not going to change color. It's not going anywhere. That's why oil painting is such an amazing tool, because it records exactly what's in your mind and coming off your hand. If you're not paying attention, it will record you not paying attention. So your brush strokes will look like they're mindless. If you're aware and watch your strokes going down, you can affect how that looks. So if you make them, all this is mistakes. All these are searching for the right value and pulling the whole thing together all at once. So as you can see, those shapes are not quite accurate. I'm losing the drawing, and I'm covering up my lines, and a lot of those strokes are sloppy and out of control. That's what I'm looking for on this. It's taken me 40 years to figure that out. But now correcting things, you're going to be correcting as you go in wet paint. Now, after it dries, you just reapply some wetter paint, and you can reconnect and do it with the brush from there. Because you can keep piling paint upon paint upon paint with the oil paint.
We have another question here who
Yeah.
says they're always scared to start with oil paint. They feel like they have to prepare so much before they start, and they're not sure if they would do it correctly. What do you do to prepare before you get started?
You know, took a lot of years to figure out that the more preparation you do before you paint, the better. You don't want to be finding stuff out when you go into the final painting. At least I don't, because I want to know where I'm going, and then leave the experience of the pigment to those final hours that you're painting. But you want to work on it in your mind. You want to see that painting being painted in your head. It's rehearsal before you go ahead and do the final thing. So there's a lot of prep time. So I'll do thumbnails, I'll search for reference, I'll shoot reference, I redraw and redraw. Then I use some of that reference and combine and project that final drawing down to my surface. And I know by that time what my lighting conditions are, and I've got my reference ready, and I know the colors I'm working with. Now, all that can change on the fly because of the wet paint, but don't be afraid of the paint at all. Watercolor, be afraid of watercolor. Watercolor takes more planning than oil paint, because you can screw oil paint up and still come back and make it look good. Watercolor needs a lot of prep to understand what you're doing. Watercolor goes light to dark, oil paint goes dark to light. So it's a tough medium, watercolor. Everybody wants to start there because they think it's easier. It feels easier, but it's pretty tough. Oil paint, don't worry about doing it right. You're not going to mess it up. As a matter of fact, at this point, I don't usually work with a lot of medium in my paint. I use a lot of paint straight from the tube. It's made so well these days, you don't have to worry too much about any of that. It just depends on how you want the pigment to feel on the end of your brush, and how it goes down, and what surface is there that you like to paint on. These are the discoveries. It's going to take you a little time. You're going to find out how it feels to you. You get bad brushes, you're going to make bad strokes. It's going to feel weird, and you're not going to like it. So you're going to want to spend a little money on medium range brushes to get that feel. You don't have to buy super expensive paint in the beginning, because you want to get that feeling. You want to understand how you're manipulating the paint. What I'm doing here, let's just freeze that for a second. There you go. I'm working from the bottom layers of skin up. If I could take that top layer of skin off, it'd be that next layer down. So these are darker layers of paint underneath, and you can see I'm laying the lighter color on top of that. That is everything you need to know about oil paint right there. Darker color on the bottom, lighter color on top. That's it. I know it sounds simple, but it is exactly what's going on. Now you can see where I'm headed with a lot of this. Some of these things are going to change, and some of these strokes won't change. And we'll talk about that if you like. Let's get back to it here. I started using a palette knife. You're probably going to wonder why, because I avoided it for years. It allows me to break it up and get a lot of texture. I had a job where they asked me to do some faces that didn't look like faces, but that the eyes were realistic. So the only thing I could figure out to use was a palette knife. Well, this allowed a discovery for my work to be able to put pigment down in such a sloppy mess. I mean, look at this. This thing is awful. It's going through an ugly stage right now, but it's all preparation for the final layers. I'm going to come in with a brush now and start moving pigment around in a little bit, but all this is preparation. I'm laying down shape, I'm laying down value, laying down color. I don't recommend you start out painting this way. I would recommend working with a brush. Palette knife will piss you off good style because it doesn't listen to anything you tell it to do, or very little. Now here you can see I'm coming in with the brush. What I'm doing now is I'm blending edges, hard and soft edges. I'm controlling how you look at the paint by the edge. Soft edges drop back, hard edges come forward. So anything with a lot of contrast and a sharp edge is going to come forward. And it's going to say to the viewer, look at me first. The soft edges lay back. The viewer looks at those later or feels them in the corner of their eye. Any other questions, Tad?
Yeah, actually, this next question was asking what percentage of your painting is done with a palette knife and how much of it is done with a brush?
You know, great question. 90% of the beginning stages, I work with the palette knife. This, by the way, is a 5-inch square painting. It's pretty tiny, and that's a tiny little palette knife. I just got used to trying to work with my control. The more you control your muscles and your define motor skills in your fingers, the better control you have for holding the pigment, moving the pigment around. So you see I came in with a little tiny brush there. 90% of the beginning stage is palette knife, 10% the beginning stage is brush. By the time I get to the end, it's probably 10 to 15% palette knife, 90 to 85% of the brush.
We have a question from someone who's saying that whenever they try to layer paint, they end up picking up the paint that was on the canvas instead of layering new paint on top. What advice do you have to fix this?
Wow, a very light touch would be the first answer. No, basically, if you watch on a lot of this, okay, that one's done. Let me get up the next layer here. I had to put it in 2 different videos. Here we go.
Right, because even though that was just took a couple seconds, you said that was like 40 minutes of painting in real time.
Right, yeah. So here I'm going to show you real time again while we look at this. Oops, let me move that over again. There we go. So as you'll see with as we go to the next painting as well, you'll see the brush penetrate through layers that are already on there. Sometimes you want to do that and sometimes you don't. Here's the thing, you notice the palette knife, that's a pretty light touch on there. Let's see, we gotta turn the sound down, sorry. Okay. Now that's a hard stroke right there. And the one before was a lighter touch. You can see there's a little bit of a hard stroke there because I'm cutting through that paint. I'm doing that on purpose to get the line. And then I'll fuss with that later. when you're applying paint in the first stages, you're pretty rough with the paint. You know, you want to lay it down, get it down there, get some brush moving around. As you get to the next layers up, you're going to lighten your strokes. Unless you're going to pull through some of those layers, like say in a brown down in here, I might pull through those layers to mix the browns, remix on the canvas. But once I get up on these highlights and stuff, I'm using the lighter touch on the canvas, and you'll see a light touch with the little paintbrush here. That's still cutting through some of the layers, and when it does that, I'll just mix a bigger batch of paint like I did there and reapply. You want to be painting thin at first. That's a classic thing about oil paint. Fat over lean, they say, and I always say thick over thin. So your first stages, your beginning stages are thin, so that you can start laying fresh color on top of that. If you have too thick a pigment and you really need to shift the color or temperature, and you can't do it by adding pigment that you mix together on the surface, then you might want to wipe it off. Wipe off an area. The great thing about pencil drawing that you see here is that it's sealed with an acrylic layer. This is acrylic wash down here. And the oil tends to not cut through that. So if I needed to wipe something off to get back to the eye, for instance, or the nostrils, I could wipe the oil paint off and find my drawing and use it as a guide. That's something I wanted to mention too. You know, I mentioned I lose the drawing as I go. I lose one drawing to replace it with a second drawing. So I lose the pencil drawing because that's guiding how I lay the brushwork down. But I'm building the oil drawing on top of that. I'm finding a new drawing by drawing with the brush, with the oil paint. It took me a lot of years to figure out how to say that. And just the other day when I was painting, I realized, oh, right, I'm replacing one drawing for another one. Because everybody wants to know, if you're going to lose a drawing, what's the point? No, but the first drawing is a guide. And if you see it that way, then you'll get less worried about losing that drawing as you go. Oh, I'm sorry, this is at actual speed. Let's ramp this up a little bit. You can see where I'm going. Go ahead.
Our next question was just asking, do you use the thickness of the paint to give the painting structure?
Thickness of the paint. I'm always considering the thickness of the paint for how the finish is going to look in that way. So just to talk a moment about where I'm going in my mind with this particular piece, I wanted to focus in on Harrison Ford's, you know, the T area in his face, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. But I was thinking up into the forehead, down through the nose, and just a little bit of the mouth, and then I'm done. That's the most important part. I wanted to capture his likeness in as little bit of time and effort as possible. Because that's what works well for this approach. I want it to look quite free. And on those final layers, then I can start moving the pigment around to adjust for that structure of how that face looks. And I'm thinking of the planes of the face, how the light hits this plane, how the light hits the side of the nose, the top of the nose, the bridge of the nose, above the eye. You see that reflection up there is different from the upper part of his forehead. All that is based on value. If I painted his forehead green, but I nailed the value, it would still look like Harrison Ford. It would still be Harrison Ford's forehead. I could paint his lips purple, his eyes red, and his forehead green. Anyway, let's see. Now I'm back in there with a brush and I'm moving a lot of that pigment around. Is there another question?
Yeah, we have a question from someone who From Jennifer. So thank you, Jennifer. They said they used above the timberline as part of their thesis paper, and they have a background in oils.
Wow.
But they're wondering, do you think that oil painting is still a viable option when it comes to illustration in a fast-paced commercial
Oh,
sense?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me tell you, when I went to freelance, I did all kinds of techniques because I wanted to do the hot thing, right? I wanted to do the hot technique. I wanted to be a sought after illustrator. So I was doing all kinds of watercolor and pastel and Prismacolor and gouache and some oil, and I did that for 11 years, and I was miserable because I wasn't getting to my first love, which was oil paint. Why? Because I was told early on, you can't oil paint in this business because you can't get it to dry, you'll never meet your deadlines, how are you going to ship it to the client, blah, blah, blah. I figured out a way. Actually, I got to a frustration point where I just knew I had to oil paint. I was going to oil paint no matter what. I was going to make it work. So I figured out a way to dry the paint quickly. And I'll talk about that in a minute if you want. I also got it shot. I had to work 4 days ahead of the deadline schedule in order to get it shot and shipped to the client. When I got it shot, I sent them a photograph of what it was. And the client loved that because now they could tell me what to change and I still had the painting. So it worked out quite well to work ahead of schedule. Well, now I don't have to work that much ahead of schedule because of digital and all the rest. But I'll tell you what, you can work with oil painting because you can just shoot it digitally and send it off to the client, and that's all they need at that moment to get okayed. Then when they want it, if everything's good, then I ship them the original if they want, but generally I have it scanned and I send them a high-res scan. So it's not a problem now with oil paint at all. Even if it's wet and you shoot it yourself, you have it at home, you can send them the file, and that solves all your problems that way. Not a problem at all to work in oil paint that I found. I'm starting to work a lot more digitally now too, though. But that's because I just love digital painting and digital work. There's so much digital work going on that I want to be a part of that too.
We're getting some questions that are asking if you could maybe go into more detail about the colors you chose and the tones you chose for the face.
Yeah. Now I used, of course, the photography as a guide this is a frame out of the movie that I like. And I liked it because of that foreshortening on the arm from the gun going straight to his face. I enjoyed that. You see, I kept the gun out of focus basically, and the edges on the face are a lot sharper. So our eyes go to the face first. The colors I chose were inspired by the photography, but enhanced by me. So you can see some of this more colorful area down here in his cheek. I read into the photography from that and boosted a bit of what you guys call saturation and we used to call chroma back in when I started out. So I'm also thinking of the roundness of his face. The roundness here is going to catch that light the way he's lit, and then everything comes off from there. So this is going to be the fresh color in this part of his face, right in here. And the rest of the color will drop off in grayed down color from there. I'm thinking in terms of temperature of the skin. So the skin is warm and cool, but now on this shot, some of the cooler areas are up in here where the value rolls off, and the hotter parts are where the light is striking his face. And then this ear was not like that in in the shot from the film. But I love to do that ear glow when it's light coming from behind. So I threw that in myself. The rest of that, this great cerulean blue comes out of a lot of photography from Hollywood. When you see those photographs, that's a really wonderful magic color. Anyway, I hope did that help?
Yeah, I think it did, because I think there's some questions specifically asking about the blues and the reds.
Yeah, now that on a different day, I could use a different blue if I wanted. If I painted this on a different day, because I'm different each day and you're different each day, I might choose to paint it in a different way. I might choose to accent different colors. So repainting another piece on a different day, you can imagine the brushwork areas like this are never going to be the same, Although I've had to try to copy one of my paintings to duplicate it. I did the Captain Morgan Spiced Rum Pirate, and they had a problem at one point. I needed to repaint the whole painting, so I had to duplicate my brush strokes from the first painting to the second painting. It was a pain in the neck, but I was able to do 95% of it.
It's like a master copy of yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, it was bizarre. I'm looking at my painting, trying to do my painting. It was kind of strange. Other questions coming up?
Yeah, this next question's asking, isn't the paint usually thick when using a palette knife?
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking for. I want it to be thick, except those first layers. So I add I use Gamsol, which is odorless mineral spirits. It takes a while to get used to Gamsol if you're used to turpentine, because turpentine cuts that paint really well. But you don't want to work with turpentine. It's terrible. It messes up your nostrils, and don't use that stuff. Gamsol is great, and it loosens up that paint just right. And when I first lay it down, I'm using, and we'll take a look at that in the next painting coming up. I'll point out some of those strokes are very thin, and some of the pigment looks thick, but it's not. And my palette knife's cutting through and smearing the pigment. And then when I go to the other layers, then I mix a bigger gob of paint and let it come off the edge of the palette knife. I was working with my students the other day. We got into a long discussion about good brushwork and bad brushwork. And if you think that a brush will always just put down brushwork, and that's all you have to think about, then you're going to need to study good brushwork. My career of painting has been known for the brushwork, but it's not all brushwork. It's specific brushwork. And there's a lot of sloppy brushwork in here, but I learned how to make a sloppy brush mark look good over time if it's paired next to some brilliant brushwork, some brushwork that I know that when I put it down, you're loving it the same way I'm loving it. And that's really important. These brush marks that are in the sleeves, they look like they were put down just sort of willy-nilly, but no, I'm paying attention to how that paint comes off. If it comes off too sloppy, or you get those edges where the pigment pushes out to the edge and piles up on the edge of the stroke, I get rid of that and re-stroke it. It's a long discussion about what makes a good brushwork, makes a good brush stroke, and what doesn't. It's kind of a Zen thing. Personally, I think you need a lot of dirt time, is what we used to call it. You need a lot of time laying down brush strokes on whatever surface you're laying down. By the way, that eye wasn't quite right, and I went in there right there, made Harrison Ford's eyebrow almost right. Then I had to put this stroke on top to correct it. Now it was right. That's how subtle. I wanted to point that out because that's how subtle it is when you're capturing a likeness. Also, the eye, the shadow and the white of the eye is very important that's right up in here to get that eye to look round. Let's see, I got off the question there. Yeah, so I think that answered most of that one.
When you're working on a client project, do you usually make a digital sketch first, and do you paint digitally to figure out the colors before starting the painting?
You know, I should. If I was smart, I'd be doing that. No, I'm doing that a little bit more now. Recently, I've been working with, well, I've been working with the United States Postal Service for a number of years. But recently, I've been pitching them with ideas. So I've been painting those ideas digitally to show them. And then they're familiar with my oil paint work, so they know then I would take that and translate it into oil paint. I tend to not do a color sketch. Sometimes I think I should, but it kills all the joy for me. I mean, that's a little too far about knowing where to go, you know. I love the end of, I love the unknownness about it. And also it makes me afraid when I start to paint. My palms will sweat sometimes because of the excitement of where it's going to go. This is finished. Shall we go to the next one? Unless there were specific questions about this particular piece. Anybody got that?
I think it's a lot of general questions about painting. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
let's go ahead and go to the next one.
We'll go to the next one. So this is the final demo here for tonight. Oh, you know what? What I'm going to do, this is kind of fun. You guys will get a charge out of this. We can go backwards and you can see me lift the paint off. Now I'm putting it back on. Look, now notice how, you see, I'm pushing straight through. That was that other question. See, this pigment is thin in the center and piles up on the edges. Did you see that? See how I pushed down on that? On these beginning stages, you can see I'm scraping with the palette knife. It's cutting right through the pigment and just picking up the texture of the board. Now this one was a little thicker. You see, that was a lighter touch, so I didn't press as hard. Now I'm pressing a little harder to roll that pigment a little bit. But you see how crazy messy it is. Then I go back to control that with the brush. And then we'll speed that up a little bit. And you can see how's it. Let's take a look at these strokes right there. Let's see, 2 times speed. There we go. This is, and you see how it pushed through that little dark spot in there. This is pushed through, but then it piled up on the edge. And I kind of like that. That stroke I didn't like, so I'm going to go back in and correct that, I believe. So I'm remixing right now. I lay that in there. And a lighter touch on top, which is where it stayed for a while. Then I knew I would go back in with the brush and correct and work with it. So then we'll slide that forward real fast. And you can see how a lot of the pigment goes down. You see I'm manipulating all that stuff. Hard and soft edges. Let's do it with this one. So here's the finished piece, which is my octopus I did the other day and recorded especially for you guys. No one has seen this yet. So
it's fresh
yeah.
for us.
Yay. So here's where I ended up. This is the final piece. I was working from a photograph. Obviously, I was not underwater, and I didn't have a octopus in front of me. So I was working from some stock photography I bought. So again, we started out with a drawing. I just freehanded the drawing, and these suckers, you can see, you know, they're just circles. They're just circles. You don't have to get those exactly right. I just looped them on out there. And shape of the eye and the shape of the back of the head and digestive system on the octopus. So now let's get this rocking and rolling. So acrylic over the top of that pencil. It's again 5 by 5, it's about that big. And then I looked at my reference and we'll go 2 times speed here to begin with. And you can see me start to lay down that pigment. This is thick and thin. You can see up in here it's a little thicker. See that scrape through makes it thin and then pushes the pigment on the edges like right there. Not worried about where it's going at this point. I'm just knocking in the darks. I'm looking at my reference, knocking in the darks. Giving it a very loose approach. But what you really probably don't understand right now are those strokes that look carefree. I've been doing for a lot of years. And so these were actually designed on the fly, how they would be chunked up like that. Because I knew I was going to go back in and knock them around. But I wasn't sure. That's the whole point. A lot of this stuff was left over from the early stages or medium stages in this area. Making sense, hopefully?
Yeah. Do you normally work this small? Is there a reason why you're doing 5 by 5s?
You know, again, I've worked 6 feet across, 8 feet across, 9 feet high. I've worked very big with a palette knife or just a brush. As an artist, you don't want to be held up by anything. You want to be able to work in every medium. That's my feeling. Personal feeling is you should be able to do digital and oil paint. That gives a lot of stress to the young generations now who are coming up, but you guys are going to have to work in both. And that's just the way it goes. That's what I'm doing now as well. The reason I'm doing the small stuff is because to me, they're little jewels. There are things that happen at a small size that is just beautiful to look at. The pigment and the paint has a life of its own. And when it's small, it pulls the audience down to a space that they can enjoy. They don't have to widen out, take the whole thing in. They can walk right up on it and look at it. And there's a lot of joy in how the brushwork goes down in the tiny space. It's also good training to keep your very fine muscle, very fine muscles working well with the brush in tiny spaces and then bold marks. And that's very important to keep those skills going. Because here's the thing, you don't want to get a style and milk it the rest of your career. There are plenty of artists that do that. They're brilliant. That's great. You want to keep moving, keep evolving. The guy that taught me that was Gary Kelly. If you don't know his work, you gotta look it up. It's brilliant stuff. You'll love it. Gary always had me push. He would say, go again. As I was in a studio setting and Gary was my boss. And he was always pushing himself. And he still pushes himself to this day. And I take that on as well. I've decided I wanted to zero in on oil paint, and I keep pushing my limitations on the oil. Because I discover new things, I get new ideas. And what's great, and this will happen to you guys, I get to work with younger folks the way I started out when I didn't have the education to understand how to do this. And that's why I'm here to talk about this. It is not mysterious. Oil painting, now you don't want to tell your audience that. You want them thinking that it's mysterious and hard, but it's not. I want to demystify that. It's pigment on a surface, the way you plan to put it down. That's it. That's how it goes. The rest is communication. Illustrators communicate. We are all about community. We share these things. When I came into the business, we didn't share much. We tried to hide everything, our techniques. Anyway, I'm sure there's some other questions that came in, Dad.
Yeah, we have a question, a career question actually. who's asking, as an oil painter, how do you get clients? Do they reach out to you, or do you have to apply? Or maybe at the beginning, did you have to apply?
Oh yeah, I mean, in the early stages, I was walking my portfolio around the streets of Chicago and New York and LA, and I had some originals with me, and I had printed out stuff that I thought worked out pretty good. But to get that work, the simple answer is you've got to show them, present to them what they buy. So if you want to get a cover on Time magazine, are you going to show them your octopus paintings? No. You're going to show them the portrait of Deckard or any number of political figures on the cover, or the way that you would paint on that cover. You study your client, find out what they buy, and you do paintings to show them that's how you would do it for what they buy. So if you're going for a book cover, and I do a lot of Louis L'Amour book cover work, do I show them my science fiction paintings? No. Show them horses and cowboys. That's what's going to go on that cover. And I show them my landscape paintings of, Monument Valley or whatever. So do I show them my flower paintings? No, it's not what they buy. So do I show my Louis L'Amour paintings to the science fiction book cover guys? No, that's not what they buy. So you might be thinking, well, whoa, that's a lot of painting to show people in order to get work. Yeah, it is. It's a lot of painting. And that's what you have to do. You are not a genius in 2 or 3 paintings. I don't care how brainiac you are. It ain't gonna happen. I'm talking hundreds. In order to get to the spot you want to be, you can do less than hundreds, but you have to focus 100%. Every time you lay that brush down, every time you work with pigment, every time you put a pencil on paper, you want to focus. That'll shortcut your agony. But anyway, to get back to that question, say for instance, I get a book cover for a science fiction or fantasy cover. I can also use that to show, say, National Geographic, how I would handle a historical painting, because I can point out how I can paint horses, or I can paint guys with swords or whatever, and a lot of history has all that stuff. So you can use what you're doing to show the next client, and use what you do for them to show the next client, and you build your way from there. Artists are not born, they're built. And I'm sorry to disappoint everybody who's dying to find out whether you need talent to be in this business. And I'm saying, no, you don't. What you need is a work ethic, and a lot of time, and a lot of skill, and a lot of training. And oh, gee, where have we heard that before? Everywhere else. Musicians, sports people, doctors, scientists. Why should art be any different? It's not. Okay, anyway, Tad.
It's a good talk. I mean, and that's not to say that they shouldn't draw their flower paintings, or they shouldn't draw.
Right. No, flowers, amazing. Amazing flower paintings. It's great.
I don't want to jump ahead in your talk here, but we have someone who's dying to hear that technique you were talking about by improving drying times.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm going to shorten your agony in 20 seconds. Okay, I overheard a conversation one day, many, many years ago, between Gary Kelly and Brault Braultz. I don't know if you know Brault's work. He's still painting, I think. And he said to Gary that he was using a alkyd resin-based white paint. So I thought, I took note of that. And I went and bought some and tried it out. So I bought Winsor Newton's Griffin brand titanium white, alkyd white. It says alkyd in there. It has an alkyd resin in it. The white will set up within 5 hours, sometimes faster than that. So you can start to layer paint pretty quickly, but it also stays wet and loose for a long time. And if you're painting, I do most of my paintings in 1 to 2 days. So I can get it to dry overnight. Anything that white pigment touches, which means all of these colors in here that has white in it, all of this is gonna, anything that white touches is gonna speed up the drying time. Don't use Japan dryer and forget about liquid. That stuff's gonna give you a cancer or something in a heartbeat. It's toxic. Paint that's alkyd resin based is far safer as long as you're not eating it and putting it on your face, right? And your hands and stuff. So that stuff will definitely get that paint dry pretty fast. Sometimes it dries faster than I want. I have to layer some more wet paint on top of it. It's not a problem.
We have a question from someone who wants to know if you've experimented yet with Procreate on the iPad.
Oh yeah, I'm using it all the time now. One of my students said, you ought to try Procreate one time, a couple of years ago. And I put it off, and then I tried it and went, oh my God, this is Photoshop without all the grief. Photoshop is like, if you took all your equipment, everything you had, and piled it on your drawing table, all your brushes, all your paint, all your T-squares and triangles and paper and pens and lights, and you threw it on top of your desk. And somebody said, now paint. You'd have to clear a space. And I know a lot of people here use Photoshop and they love it. And Photoshop is amazing. But what Procreate does is sweeps all that off the table and puts only the stuff you're going to use on the table. And when I discovered that, then it opened up for me. And the Apple Pen was remarkable. Instead of a stylus, I could turn it sideways and get a pencil feel to it. So yeah, I fell in love with it. I do a lot more digital work now. I don't show a lot of people. I plan to start throwing that up on Instagram if you guys want to see it. It resembles the oil paint, but not exactly. And I want to paint differently in digital than I do with the oil paint, because one feeds the other. Digital feeds oil paint feeds the digital. If you can think of it that way, you're going to have far less problem with actual pigment. It's about those skills with your hands, those minute muscles. If you want to train your hand, if you're drawing, the vibration from the pencil on the paper is feeding up those nerve endings, and your brain is picking that up. How the pencil moves and flows on the page, all extremely important. There's a lot of neuroscience now about peak performance. I behoove you to read a lot of it. I always tell everybody, get started on that, read The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, and you'll know what I'm talking about. It's not a thick book, it's very accessible, very good. How's that, Ted?
That's a wonderful, I mean, it's like, someone in the chat says like, they know exactly what you're talking about when you describe Photoshop. They just didn't have the words to say it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to put down Photoshop. It's great, but it's a learning curve, you know. My big thing is, why do you put all the tiny little icons way along in the, I can't even see them, you know. Anyway, and then it's like a Pandora's box. You open an icon one day and go, oh my God, look. Yeah, unbelievable. Anyway.
Our next question here is asking if you've had a memorable or favorite project that you were able to work on.
Memorable or favorite project that I had to work on? Well, lately, oh man, I've got so many of them. I'm not kidding you. The postage stamps have been great. By the way, the Enjoy the Great Outdoors set of stamps is out right now. I'm doing this because it comes in a page. That's out at the post office. You'll see my tiny little postage stamps paintings on there. That was really fun. Working with the post office is fun. Working on the Faces campaign that I did, where I learned a lot of how to work with a palette knife, was amazing. Recently, 2 projects. One was I I did the DVD cover for the Criterion Collections set for The Irishman by Martin Scorsese. And I did the cover painting and 3 portrait paintings of Al Pacino and De Niro and Al Pesci in there. And those were really fun. And I just loosened up and splashed oil paint around, and lo and behold, it looked like those guys. So I was pretty happy. The really, really fun one lately, though, was painting for the movie, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I got to work one-on-one with the Coen brothers, and that was a good time. That was just a good time all the way along. If you haven't seen the movie, you must watch it. It's excellent. It's wonderful. It's like oil paint. It has meat to it. It's shot well. It's acted well. It's edited well. It's just everything good about that. And I picked that up when I read the screenplay. It just came pouring off the page, and I got to work with them directly. I asked the art director, do I get to work for them or with them? And it turned out I got to work with them in Tribeca in New York, and came by and we talked about how to design the work. They told me what they wanted, and I did thumbnail sketches. And at one point we were play acting in the basement because they couldn't figure out how to get Buster to show his card hands and fall back. So we were play acting in the basement. It was pretty silly, but it was fun.
Well, unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of our time here. So I just want to
Really?
ask this one last question we have.
Well, how much time do we have? Because I'll speed this up a little bit.
We have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, here we go. It should have been 5 times speed, and I didn't do that. Here, I'll knock it up to 30 times speed, and that ought to finish us out just right. You can see how I've been laying the paint down. Now I'm coming in with the brush to affect those edges, and I'm pulling that all together. And you'll see as I go along those suckers, some of them are detailed, some of them are not. But I put the main part of the color down, and then I'm going to carve around that color to get the circle. Go ahead, Tad. What's the question?
The last question I wanted to ask is, they're asking, is there any way they can study online with you?
Oh yeah, I teach online at Smarter Art School. So smarterartschool.com. You can find my classes there. I have a Saturday class, and right now I'm teaching a dual class with Scott Fisher, which has been remarkable. Scott is amazing on the computer and is an amazing drawer and wonderful person, and he teaches really well, and he explains things that you can get, and we just have a great time going back and forth. And then my Saturday class is there because a lot of people work and they couldn't take lessons. It's once a week for 3 hours. We usually go over sometimes, and I have about 8 to 9 students on the average. We go over whatever it is you want to do for your portfolio. So we do comics, we do book cover work, we do gallery stuff. All of it is based on having an excellent idea of composition. I teach from a compositional point of view. Composition is concept. You change the composition, you change the concept. And we have a great time. We do a lot of laughing. And there's a lot of crazy questions that get answered. The whole idea is to demystify this process. You want to be an artist? You want to be an illustrator? You can do this. It's not easy, but you can do this. You can work in the arts and make a living working in the arts. It's going to take a lot of effort, but you can do that. Much to the counter what I was told years ago. By the way, all the art schools rejected me when I started out. I only found one school that would take me. So I started from 0 and worked my way up. Other questions, Tan?
Well, we're at the end of our time here. There are other questions. There's like 21 other questions. So
Oh,
yeah, I know we can't answer all of them,
oh man.
but it's great to know that there's a place where they can find you online
Yeah.
and learn more from you.
Oh, yes. And I also write articles for muddycolors.com. I write a lot about painting and the whole effort, and you'll find some of my posts there called 10 Things. I tend to simplify it again. And I'm on Instagram and Facebook from time to time. Not all the time, but I put drawings and paintings up there. So love to have you in my class if you guys are interested. You can do this. Like Tina says, you got this. There's a good finish for you, huh?
That's it. That's like the CTN logo. It feels like sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And thanks to you. Thanks to you, Tad, for hanging out there with me. Is this thing? Yeah, it's just about done. There it is. And by the way, I'll just say this. After the camera went off, which it did right now, I did tickle a few of those strokes over there to, like this little dark stroke right there had to go in.
Some cheating, I see.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, you just can't stay away, Anyway,
Well,
thanks again, Tad.
yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks to everybody for coming.
Hugely inspiring. Everyone in the yeah, everyone's sounding off. Thank you so much.
You bet. See ya. Bye.